My husband signed over his restaurant empire to his girlfriend 2 months before he filed for divorce. He did it quietly, legally, and he thought I had no idea. When I found out, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I opened a new folder on my laptop, labeled it simply with the date, and I started building something he would never see coming. His name was Derek. Mine is Sarah. And this is the story of how I gave him exactly what he wanted, and watched it destroy him. We met when I was 24, and he was 27, both of us working at the same downtown Chicago hotel. He was charming in that specific way that only reveals itself as dangerous later. The kind of man who made you feel like the most important person in the room, right up until the moment he needed you to be invisible. We got married 18 months after our first date, in a small ceremony on the shores of Lake Michigan. And for a while, it was good. Or at least, it looked good from the outside, which I later realized was all that mattered to him. The restaurant came first, then the second one, then a third. Derek had a gift for hospitality, and an even greater gift for convincing investors that his vision was worth betting on. By the time our daughter Emma was born, he owned 4 locations across Chicago, under the name Harlow Group, and he was the kind of man who got mentioned in local business magazines and shook hands at city council fundraisers. I was proud of him. I want to be honest about that. For a long time, I was genuinely proud. I left my job in hotel marketing after Emma arrived. Derek had asked me to, with that same reasonable voice he used whenever he'd already made a decision. You'll want to be home with her. You'll regret it if you're not. I believed him, partly because I wanted to, and partly because I was exhausted and 29 and certain that my husband knew things I didn't. So I became a full-time mother, and he became a full-time executive. And somewhere in that division we stopped being partners and became 2 people sharing a mortgage. Emma was everything. I want you to understand that before I go any further. She was 7 when all of this began to unravel, with her father's dark eyes and a habit of narrating her own life like a nature documentary. "Watch how the butterfly lands on the flower," she'd whisper, crouched in our backyard, completely serious. She made everything feel worth it. She still does. My husband, however, had stopped making things feel worth it sometime around her 4th birthday. The late nights were the first sign, then the locked phone, then the slow, careful way he began to separate the business finances from our household accounts, explaining it as a restructuring, tax optimization, things I wouldn't understand. He'd say that last part without malice, which somehow made it worse. "You don't need to worry about the business side of things. I handle that." I didn't argue. I had learned by then that arguing with Derek was like pressing on a bruise. It only hurt you. The night I found out the truth, Emma had asked me to print a photo of a monarch butterfly for her school project. I went to Derek's home office to use the printer, and his laptop was open. He'd stepped out to take a call in the garage, something he'd started doing whenever his phone rang after 9. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I was looking for the print button, but the document on his screen stopped me cold. It was a transfer agreement. Harlow Group LLC, all 4 restaurants, their assets, their liquor licenses, their equipment leases, everything being transferred to a new entity called Ashford Ventures LLC. I didn't recognize the name. I photographed the screen with my phone. Then I went back to the kitchen, printed Emma's butterfly, and helped her glue it to her poster board while my hands stayed perfectly steady. That steadiness surprised me. I had expected fear. What I felt instead was something colder and more useful. Clarity. My college roommate had become a family law paralegal after years of working at a downtown Chicago firm. She was the person I called the next morning, walking 3 blocks from our house so Derek wouldn't hear me through the windows. "I need to understand something," I told her. "If a business owner transfers all his assets to a new LLC before a divorce, what happens?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That depends on when it happened and why. And Sarah, who is Ashford Ventures? I didn't know yet. But I was going to find out." It took me 6 days, and a lot of late-night searching after Emma went to bed. Ashford Ventures LLC had been registered in Illinois 14 months earlier. The registered agent was a woman named Ashley Crenshaw, 29 years old, event coordinator. Her professional Instagram, which was public, showed a woman with long dark hair, a habit of photographing herself at restaurants, and I noticed, with a strange detachment, several photos taken inside locations I recognized as 2 of Derek's 4 restaurants. locations she'd tagged simply as my favorite spot. I called my roommate back. The transfers might qualify as fraudulent conveyance, she told me. Under the Illinois Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act, if someone transfers assets with the intent to defraud a creditor or a spouse within 4 years, those transfers can be reversed by a court. You'd need to prove intent, though, and you'd need documentation. I thought about the folder on my laptop. Good, I said. I'm already working on that. What followed was 22 months of silence and preparation. I want you to understand what that means. 22 months of watching my husband come home smelling like someone else's perfume and saying nothing. 22 months of sitting across the dinner table from a man who thought I was too distracted by chicken nuggets and elementary school pickup to notice what he was doing. 22 months of photographing bank statements, printing transfer documents, tracking the gradual disappearance of our shared financial life into a company registered to his girlfriend. I opened a personal savings account at a credit union across town. I contacted an employment recruiter quietly, updating my resume for the first time in 7 years. I found a family law attorney through a friend of a friend, a woman named Patricia, 48 years old, with an office in Lincoln Park and a reputation for cases involving hidden assets. When I walked into Patricia's office with 3 accordion folders of documentation, she read through them without speaking for nearly 20 minutes. Then she looked up. Most clients come to me hoping I can find something, she said. You've already found everything. I had 2 years to find it, I told her. He thought I was just the mom. She smiled. That was his first mistake. The morning Derek told me he wanted a divorce, Emma was at school and I was reorganizing her bookshelf when he appeared in the doorway in his good blazer, the one he wore to investor meetings. He had clearly practiced what he was going to say. I can tell when Derek has rehearsed something, there's a particular stillness to him, like an actor waiting for his cue. I think we both know this isn't working, he started. I want to be fair to you. I'm willing to make sure you and Emma are taken care of, but I think it's time we went our separate ways. I set down the book I was holding. What are you proposing? He named it all. He would retain full ownership of Harlow Group, he said. He'd already consulted with attorneys about the restructuring, and the business assets were held separately from our marital estate. He would pay child support, minimum required by the state. He'd be open to shared custody, he said generously, though his schedule was demanding and he wanted flexibility. I could keep the house if I refinanced it into my own name, which we both knew I couldn't afford on no income. I kept my face neutral. I understand. I'll need time to review everything with my own attorney. He blinked. I'd expected the tears, the bargaining, the panic. His expression shifted slightly, recalibrated. Of course, he said. I want this to be amicable, Sarah. For Emma's sake? For Emma's sake, I repeated. Absolutely. I called Patricia from the car before I'd even pulled out of the driveway. The pressure started within 2 weeks. Derek, it turned out, was on a timeline. Ashley was pregnant. Hehodna, Dord Mayet. But I found out through his brother, who had always liked me more than he liked his own brother, and who called me one evening, sounding uncomfortable and guilty. I just thought you should know before you hear it some other way, he said. She's about 3 months along. I thanked him. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot of Emma's dance studio and breathed through it for a few minutes, not because I was heartbroken I had released that particular grief somewhere around month 8 of my silent investigation, but because it reframed the urgency. Derek wasn't just trying to protect his assets. He was trying to build a new life on top of the one he was dismantling, and he needed the legal architecture in place before anyone looked too closely. He needed me to sign quickly. The calls came from multiple directions. His mother, a trim, precise woman who had never once asked about my career or my ambitions, left me a voicemail, explaining that Derek had worked very hard for everything he had, and that she hoped I wouldn't be the kind of woman who punished success out of bitterness. His brother, the same one who'd warned me, was pressured into a follow-up call, stumbling through a script he clearly hadn't written. Even Ashley called once, from a number I didn't recognize, her voice carefully sympathetic. I just want you to know there are no hard feelings on my end, she said. I think you're a wonderful mother. I thanked her politely and ended the call. What none of them understood was that I didn't need to fight. I just needed them to stay confident. Patricia and I had spent weeks preparing a settlement agreement that, on its surface, appeared to give Derek everything he wanted. The restaurants, the equipment, the branding, all associated business assets transferred to his sole ownership. I would retain primary physical custody of Emma, full legal custody, not the flexible arrangement Derek had proposed, but full legal authority over every decision affecting my daughter's life. I would receive child support calculated on Derek's income prior to the transfer to Ashford Ventures, which was significantly higher than what he was currently claiming to earn. And buried in the agreement, on page 31 of a 44-page document, was a clause that referenced all prior asset transfers conducted within 48 months of the divorce filing as subject to equitable review under Illinois fraudulent transfer statutes. It wasn't a trap, exactly. Everything in that document was disclosed, legally transparent, available to anyone who read it carefully. Patricia had been meticulous about that. We weren't hiding anything. We were simply presenting it in a format that relied on Derek's arrogance to do the rest of the work for us. He won't read past page 5, I told her. She raised an eyebrow. How certain are you? I've been watching him skim contracts for 7 years, I said. He signs wherever his attorney points. His attorney was a man named Gordon, a firm handshake type who charged $800 an hour and wore cufflinks to everything. He had reviewed an earlier, simpler version of the agreement and sent back revisions. But Derek, pressured by Ashley's pregnancy timeline, pressured by his mother's expectations, pressured by his own certainty that I had nothing and knew nothing, had pushed to finalize quickly. Gordon had recommended a full forensic accounting of the business assets. Derek had said it wasn't necessary. That decision would cost him everything. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. Patricia and I arrived early. The courtroom was small and functional, the kind of room that absorbed people's worst days without commentary. I wore a gray cardigan and the simple gold bracelet Emma had made me out of plastic beads the previous Christmas. I wanted to feel her with me. Derek arrived with Gordon and his mother, who had apparently decided this warranted her presence. She positioned herself in the gallery like a woman attending a coronation. Derek himself looked polished and relaxed, the posture of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. He looked at me when I walked in. I smiled. He smiled back, that particular smile, the one I now recognized as relief, that I wasn't going to make things complicated. I sat down beside Patricia and didn't look at him again. The clerk read the terms into the record. As each item was named the restaurants, the licenses, the equipment, the Harlow Group brand, I watched Derek's posture ease further. His mother clasped her hands in her lap with quiet satisfaction. Gordon was going through pages quickly, too quickly, his eyes scanning rather than reading. The judge, a methodical woman in her 50s, looked up at me over her glasses. Miss Calloway, you understand you're relinquishing your community interest in these business assets? I do, Your Honor. And you've reviewed this agreement with your counsel and had adequate time to ask questions? Yes, Your Honor. She turned to Derek. Mr. Calloway, I see here that your attorney recommended an independent financial review of the marital business assets and you declined. Is that accurate? Derek straightened slightly, performing confidence. It is, Your Honor. I built Harlow Group from nothing. I don't need an outside accountant to explain my own company to me. Very well. The judge made a note. You're signing a waiver to that effect on page 38. Derek took the pen from Gordon without looking at the page. He signed with the easy confidence of a man who had already won, slid the document toward the clerk. It was Gordon who found it first. I was watching him, had been watching him since the moment we sat down, because Patricia had told me to watch the attorney, not the husband. When a deal goes sideways, she'd said, the lawyer knows before anyone else. And I saw it the way Gordon's hand stopped turning pages, the way his eyes went still, the way he reached for Derek's arm with the kind of urgency that meant everything had just changed. Vincent Derek, he said, his voice dropping. Wait, but Derek was already leaning back in his chair, exhaling the long breath of a man who had just crossed a finish line.
What?
He barely glanced over. Page 31, what about it? Gordon held the document out, his finger on the clause. Derek took it. I watched his eyes move across the text. I watched the exact moment the meaning landed. What does this mean? His voice was still controlled, but something underneath it had cracked. It means, Gordon said very quietly, that every asset transfer you made to Ashford Ventures in the 14 months before filing could be reversed by this court as fraudulent conveyance. Because your wife's attorney has just referenced the statute directly in a signed, court-filed settlement agreement. Derek turned to look at me. I met his eyes and said nothing. Your Honor. He stood up. I need to address something in this document. Judge Morrison looked up. Mr. Calloway, there is a clause here that I was not fully aware of. My attorney and I need time to— You signed the waiver, Patricia said calmly, before Gordon could respond. Your client specifically declined independent review. He signed that waiver voluntarily 4 minutes ago. The agreement has been executed. Derek's voice rose slightly. She deceived me. This whole thing was designed— The judge held up one hand. Mr. Calloway, sit down, please. He didn't sit. Your Honor, this clause could expose me to litigation. This could affect assets that were legitimately transferred. Could they have been legitimately transferred? Judge Morrison tilted her head. Because what I'm reading here suggests a transfer of substantial marital business assets to a third-party LLC 14 months before you filed for divorce. Your wife's attorney has preserved the right for this court to review those transfers for fraudulent intent. She included full disclosure of that right in a document you were advised to have independently reviewed. You chose not to. She set down her glasses. Sir, I've been on this bench for 19 years. I cannot protect parties from decisions they made with full information available to them. Gordon was on his feet now, trying to speak quietly into Derek's ear. Derek wasn't listening. His face had gone a color I'd never seen on him before, something between gray and red. In the gallery, his mother stood up. Derek. Her voice was sharp. Mom. Just he held up his hand without looking at her. You told me this was handled. The room had gone very still. From the corner of my eye, I could see the court clerk pretending to look at her computer. It is handled, Derek said. It is not handled. Her voice dropped below the threshold of dignity she usually maintained. You told me she had nothing. You told me there was nothing to find. His mother gathered her coat. I came here to watch you finalize this. Not to watch you fall apart in front of a judge. She walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. The door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. I exhaled slowly. Derek stood very still for a moment. Then he turned to face me fully, and I saw something I had genuinely not expected. Not rage, exhaustion. He looked like a man who had been running for a very long time and had just realized he'd been running in circles. You knew, he said. You knew about Ashford. You knew about the transfers. I've known for almost 2 years. He stared at me. Why didn't you say anything? I thought about the 22 months. The folders, the sleepless nights, Emma asking why Daddy seemed sad, and me saying, Daddy's just busy, sweetheart. The recruiter calls. The savings account built one paycheck at a time. Because I was waiting until I was ready, I said. The hallway outside the courtroom was bright with morning light coming through tall windows. I sat on a bench while Patricia completed the paperwork inside. My phone had 3 text messages. One from Emma's school reminding me about picture day. One from my roommate asking how it went, and one from Derek's number sent 3 minutes ago. I need to talk to you. Please. I didn't respond. Not yet. I thought about Ashley, who was 4 months pregnant with my husband's child, and who had just become the registered owner of a restaurant empire that a court was now going to scrutinize for fraudulent transfer. I didn't feel sorry for her, not then. Not entirely. She had known he was married. But she hadn't known about the debt leverage. The risk she'd been handed along with the deed. She'd been given a poisoned inheritance and told it was a gift. Patricia found me on the bench 20 minutes later. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes said everything. We have a strong case for the fraudulent transfer litigation, she said. Given that he signed the waiver and the settlement is executed, the court will review the Ashford transfers. Based on the documentation you've provided, the timeline and the intent are very clear. And Emma? Full legal custody is in the signed agreement, she confirmed. He agreed to that in writing. Visitation will require mediation, but you have sole decision-making authority. I pressed my hands flat on my thighs and breathed. That was the moment it landed. Not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more permanent. The particular relief of having carried something heavy for a very long time, and finally being allowed to set it down. I want to pause here for just a moment. I know we're almost at the end of this, and I'll get there, I promise. But before I do, I need to say something to anyone listening who might recognize a piece of their own story in mine. If you are with someone who makes all the financial decisions and tells you not to worry about it, if you are with someone who treats your contribution, your years of raising children, managing a home, making a family function as something less than real work, If you are with someone who is quietly building an exit while you are quietly building a life, please hear me. You are not powerless. You may feel invisible, but invisible is not the same as defenseless. Some of the most important work I did over those 22 months happened in small, ordinary moments. A photograph here, a document there, a conversation with the right person at the right time. I am not telling you to do what I did. Every situation is its own, and some situations require a different kind of courage than strategic patience. But I want you to know that being underestimated can be a form of protection. When they stop watching you, you can finally start moving. If this story has reached someone who needed it today, share it, and if you're still here with me, drop a comment. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now let me tell you what happened in the months after that courthouse hallway, because it turned out I wasn't done being surprised. The fraudulent transfer litigation moved faster than Patricia had expected, largely because the documentation was so thorough. Illinois courts have a well-established framework for exactly this kind of case, and when a transfer of several $1 million in business assets is made to the girlfriend of a man who files for divorce 2 months later, intent is not difficult to demonstrate. Ashley's attorney contacted Patricia 3 weeks after the hearing. She was severing her agreement with Derek entirely, the call said. She was prepared to cooperate with the court's review of the transfers if it meant being released from liability on the associated debts, because it turned out the Harlow Group, for all its polish, had been carrying significant deferred tax obligations that Derek had also quietly transferred into the Ashford structure. Ashley had inherited a business wrapped in gift paper that was actually a bill. I heard later, through my roommate, that she had called her father the same afternoon her attorney made the call to Patricia. I didn't know the details. I didn't need to. By spring, the court had reversed 3 of the 4 asset transfers. The restaurants reverted to marital estate status, which meant they became subject to equitable division in the divorce division, calculated based on Derek's income at the time of the transfer, not the dramatically reduced number he'd reported after the restructuring. His attorney negotiated a settlement. My attorney was thorough. The outcome was enough for me to put a reasonable down payment on a small house in a neighborhood with a good school district, fund a proper college account for Emma, and return to work without desperation driving every decision. Derek took a job managing a single restaurant location for someone else's company. Not a bad outcome for a man who had once run 4, but a significantly different life than the one he'd been building. I thought I would feel something sharp when I heard that. Some satisfaction, or maybe some residual grief for the man I thought I'd married. What I felt was mostly nothing, which I've come to understand is actually its own kind of healing. Emma adapted the way children do when the adults around them stay steady gradually. Then all at once, she asked, during the first week in our new house, if we were poor now. I told her we were careful, and that careful was actually a very useful thing to know how to be. She thought about that for a moment and then asked if we could get a fish. We got 2. She named them both after butterflies. The thing about Derek that I've spent the most time thinking about in the quiet evenings after Emma is asleep is how thoroughly he had convinced himself that I didn't see him. Not romantically, I had given up on being seen by him a long time before any of this, but professionally, intellectually, as a person capable of strategy. He used to say, not unkindly, that I was too trusting for business, that I operated on feelings rather than logic. It was his way of explaining why the finances were better left to him, why the decisions were better made by him, why the documents were better handled by him. He genuinely believed it. I'm not sure he even knew he was doing it. But here is what he didn't understand about the woman he'd spent 7 years dismissing. Marketing is not a soft skill. Understanding how people think, what they want, what they fear, how to present information so that it lands exactly the way you intend that is a form of precision. I had spent years before Emma using it for hotel brands. I spent 22 months using it to build a case that ended his. He wasn't defeated by a lawyer or a technicality. He was defeated by his own certainty that I was not watching. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, I ran into his brother at the grocery store. We stood in the cereal aisle for a few minutes, and he told me Derek was doing okay. Not great, but okay. Therapy, apparently. A little humility, which his brother said looked genuinely unfamiliar on him, but was perhaps good for him in the long run. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it, more than I expected to. His brother looked at me for a moment. For what it's worth, he said, I always thought Derek had no idea how lucky he was. I picked up Emma's cereal and put it in my cart. I know, I said, that was sort of the whole problem. I'm back at work full-time now, in a marketing role at a mid-sized firm downtown. My commute is 40 minutes each way, and I use the time to listen to podcasts or, sometimes, just think. Emma is thriving in second grade, deeply committed to a science project about migratory patterns, and has recently decided she wants to be a marine biologist despite being entirely landlocked in Chicago. I have not discouraged this. There are hard days when I'm tired in a way that goes past the body, when I miss the version of my life that I thought I was building. Days when Emma asks why Daddy doesn't come to school events and I give her the careful and honest answer I've been working on with my own therapist. Days when the weight of doing this mostly alone settles on me in the evening, and it takes a while to lift. But there are also mornings when Emma runs into the kitchen with both fish as her conversational topic, and I'm drinking coffee in my own house that I own in my own name, and I think, this is real. This is mine. No one can take this version of my life away from me because I built it from the ground up, with my own hands, on terms I set myself. Last week, Emma and I planted herbs on the back porch. Basil, rosemary, one very ambitious attempt at cilantro. She narrated the entire process in her documentary voice, explaining to an imaginary camera the specific soil requirements of each plant. I sat back on my heels and watched her. This small, serious person who had come through everything with her imagination entirely intact. And I thought about something my therapist said early on in our sessions. She said, the goal isn't to feel nothing. The goal is to feel everything and still choose consciously what comes next. I choose this ordinary, imperfect, entirely mine life, so that's my story. A woman who was told, in 1,000 quiet ways, that she was background, who spent 2 years in that background collecting everything she needed, and then stepped forward at exactly the right moment. Not to destroy anyone, not to perform revenge for an audience, but simply to stop being erased. If any piece of this reached you today, if you're in the middle of your own quiet season, building something that no one around you can see yet, I want you to know this. The people who stop watching you because they've decided you're not worth watching, they're giving you the most useful gift possible. Use it. Hit that like button if you want more stories like this one. Subscribe if you're new here. And leave me a comment. Have you ever been counted out by someone who should have known better? Tell me what happened. I read every single one. I'm Sarah, and wherever you are tonight, I hope you know that patient and invisible are not the same as powerless. Not even close.